Hello, hello, hello. All right, so I haven't even started this thing, and already chat is very active, making some big assumptions too. Oh, okay. We'll give folks a few minutes to get in here before we get on topic, but I'll address some of the chat because I think this is relevant. Um, so we start with Lumpy Dog. Because low tech, old school works. Innovation is nice and can streamline things, but not necessary. Unfortunately, some innovation is marketed to newbies as must haves. Interesting perspective. Interesting perspective. Um, and I think partially accurate. I'll get into that, but I think part of that is like there's a fundamental level of understanding that happens that can make low tech function very effectively for freshwater. Right? Low tech really doesn't work for saltwater unless you're like uh truly at the like 1% level understanding of hobbyists. We're not talking like professional marine biologists here. They're at a whole nother level, right? But just there's few hobbyists that can do like a truly low tech saltwater tank and have it be effective and keep working, right? But interesting idea. Mitch, you should probably create innovation in the freshwater aquarium industry. No, I've had this topic for a reason. You'll see in a second. I'd argue it's precisely what Lumpy Dog said above, or at least that mentality. Freshwater organisms survive, for the most part, on low tech, and the freshwater community pride themselves on cost-effective solutions. The marine side is a 180 of that expected cost, likelihood for low-tech survival, pride in high-tech solutions and automation. It boasts regular innovation. However, it has an entirely different set of challenges and pitfalls because of it. So, I have a number of friends who are really big in the reefing hobby, and I have some that are like super tech nerds, right? They have the best possible equipment, quotation marks, that you can get. They run the crazy automation, and I can tell you as somebody who works in software engineering. Now, granted, my job is to break stuff for a living. I'm a quality assurance engineer. I'm not a software developer, but I still understand how to code and coding basics and how automation functions and where you automate and things like that. I can tell you that most of the automation that I see in the aquarium industry is terrible because it lends yourself so open to risk. So open to risk. There's a lot of singular points of failure that we use that those of us in the software industry would never use that are really depth. But we'll get into that in a second, right? Deeper things. Aquarium background tape. Good to see you, buddy. Part of the problem is big companies dominate the small and innovative entrepreneurs can't compete. I think that's actually a reasonable thing to think about. It is very hard to shell or slice into the industry. And the cost of innovation can be very expensive, especially if you are a small company. Relevant. And I think part of that could be part of our conversation in a moment. Okay, let's see here. Bob Purcell, I'm running my 20-gallon reef on air-powered skimmel and a Tidal 55. Sure. Still using a skimmer. If you think about like that, what a lot of people seek in that, like, think of some of the most popular videos recently when it comes, and potentially controversial depending on how you want to perceive them, in the freshwater side of the hobby. No water changes, right? No equipment, no this, no that. These are all like super popular things in the freshwater side of the hobby that you like just cannot do in saltwater. There are some people who really can do some crazy stuff in saltwater to where they effectively only have a pump moving water working. There's a guy down in, I think it's California, who's kind of notorious for his reef setup that doesn't require a skimmer, doesn't require any of the crazy equipment. He has figured out the balance in that system to make it happen. So there's no automation. He basically never water changes, and all that kind of stuff. All those things that like so many hobbyists in the freshwater hobby aspire to. Right? Now, let's talk. Let's get into this, and I'll do my version. Okay? Why innovation in the aquarium industry is lacking. And Craig is in here saying, "Is it?" Good to see you, buddy. let me explain what I mean. For especially the United States and parts of Canada, there is a mentality that is very differing, and I think Mitch put this very well. Very frequently in the freshwater side of the hobby, we are almost proud to try and build the most economically friendly tank possible. We're doing everything we can to get like a cheap light, a minimalistic filter, or let's do a dirted tank because that's nowhere near as expensive as trying to do aqua soil. Let's look at only air-powered filtration because it's extremely inexpensive to run. What if I change my fish so that I don't need a heater? Right? A lot of things. There is a huge mentality in the freshwater side of the hobby to try and reduce the cost at all costs in some cases. And so inherently, I think what that portion of the hobby, especially in the United States, we'll get to international portions of the hobby in a moment, almost forces innovation to not happen, at least in the parts of our market. So as an example, you will see things that come out in China or Korea, Japan, that you don't see in the United States. Think about a lot of those, and the best thing I think of is like some of the recent Hong Kong style and Chinese shop stuff that Corey did for the Aquarium Co-op last time he went to China. Right, there was all these cool tanks that had all these built-in probes and features, and they give you these readouts of all your data constantly. You don't really see that in the US side of the hobby, and by kind of default, the Canadian side of the hobby too. We will see some tools that can do that, but it's not like the common thing is to see a number of manufacturers designing prefab aquariums that just constantly monitor those things for you and have that level of tech built into them. Those things just don't make it to our side of the market. We're looking for the $1 per gallon Aqueon tank, right? We're not trying to go crazy on some of our tanks, even though those things could, in theory, lead to higher levels of success for especially newer hobbyists, because that information can be very valuable. Is that 100% the fault of the manufacturers? No. And let me explain this. I think it's in portion of both. I really think that there's a nail in the head from Aquarium background tape that part of the industry has such a stranglehold on your equipment and what gets shelf space and things like that, that very rarely do we see a smaller company try to innovate because it's almost impossible for them to compete. While in, say, the Asian markets especially, we see more and more of these things. Granted, these companies are huge compared to what we would probably think about here in the United States, but they're doing all sorts of crazy things. And there was, for a while, an example would be something like Felix, right? If you think about the whole Felix system, and in the end, it was terrible implementation. But Felix had a big dream, and the problem is the cost of the dream, because they're trying to get into something that is very difficult to slice into economically, right? And the audience that is going to be inherently interested in that is kind of a narrow portion of the audience. Now, you'll get tech crazies like me that are inherently interested in that kind of stuff. But a majority of the hobby in the United States and Canada tends to look for ways to save money. And I don't blame you. Save money. Times are tough right now, right? But I think that's really, really common. Whereas if you go to partially Europe, I think it's way more prevalent in Asia, but Europe gets some of it, especially like Germany. You see a bit more adaptation of tech. There's a more willingness to spend significantly more money. You think about the high-level aquascaping style tanks, where they're a little more common out there than they are necessarily in here, where you get those like really expensive, your ADA, your UNS, the rimless, beautiful tanks. I think the closest you're going to get to that prevalence is like a few stores in the United States, but it's not necessarily like the most common thing. Where if you think about a lot of the biggest stores in Europe and Asia in general tend to have a focus toward those higher end products. Now, you could probably argue that they're less expensive compared to maybe what would occur in the United States, especially as you're getting into some of the Asian markets. But in the end, they're still very expensive compared to, like, say, average cost of living. So people will inherently do that. Now, the saltwater side of the hobby is crazy, right? We get all sorts of crazy automation. It's way more common to have things like sump filters with all sorts of extra gadgets. Automation like Apex controllers and things like that are far more common on that side of the hobby because, and I think this is part of it, the people, especially on the reef side of the hobby, when you start looking at corals costing you several $100s, and a lot of your fish even are getting very, very expensive compared to, say, what it costs to get into freshwater, there is kind of this natural uptake in the mentality of I'm going to spend more money because even my fish and corals are more expensive, and you want to protect those things. So you start kind of looking into more expensive equipment. I don't think, especially in the North American portion of the hobby, I don't think as many people are as stressed about protecting those like $3 and $4 tetras as you would be if you were like, hey, my base yellow tang is like $100 and I need like 4 of them. You know, there are so many fish in the saltwater hobby that are kind of common that are just significantly more expensive than their freshwater counterparts. But you have these hobbies, and Wei is bringing up something. He's asking about a Kickstarter called Erusio. I haven't looked at it in depth. I had a friend mention it to me recently, and I totally spaced on going to look at it. I need to go look at the thing. But, there are like Kickstarter and other projects. Felix was one of those. It wasn't necessarily a Kickstarter project per se. Well, it might have been. Did they put on Kickstarter eventually? But it was trying to crowdfund. But I think crowdfunding is also something that's not necessarily as beloved as kind of expectations of some of these bigger companies doing that innovation work. A thought. So, Craig's Planet takes, some love quantity over quality. Yes. But I think there is an inherent, I think that's more common if you see people to go like, I'm going to buy a 20-gallon tank. Well, I can get that Aquarium tank for $20, or maybe it's 25 nowadays, versus like the rimless tank that's going to cost me $250, right? I think it's the entry point. When it becomes easier, it's easier to latch onto that. And especially because multiple tank syndrome is so prevalent and common, and it's a little less of the controlled mentality that you'll see in like Europe and Asia, where you'll have people that have a few significantly nicer tanks rather than like 15 cheaper tanks. And even me personally, I've kind of changed stuff. But where I will kind of flip back and go back to the manufacturer side, part of it is the audience has to be there to make the purchase, right? And I think if you look at like, let me give you an example, right? For when Oase started getting like the Biomasters out there and they became, their word started spreading around. The built-in pre-filter and potentially with the thermos, the built-in heater was kind of like which it shouldn't seem so rash and innovative, but it seemed very innovative. But in the end, it's really just an easy compartment to open compared to doing a full service. Right? You are only getting so much, and it's really not that grand a level of innovation as opposed to, say, some of the things that we can see with like built-in probes and all sorts of automated monitoring. Now, granted, automation has its own faults. I think some can get in a habit of relying on automation to do everything for them and forget to do the things that are most critical in our hobby. My example would be like, I've often talked, like, whenever I can properly do the fish room, I have my dream fish room. Maybe not dream fish room is not right, but my goal fish room might be more accurate. Dream fish room is like, we have more money than sense and we can go real crazy, right? Right, that's the dream. But my goal fish room is like automatic water changes and doing certain things that make it so that parts of the system are automated. But what I'll never do, and I've said this many times, I'll never automate feeding. Now, if I was away on vacation and I didn't have someone I trusted, maybe I would think about having temporary automatic feedings if it was for a long period of time, but I'm not a person to take a very long vacation, so that's unlikely. And I firmly love the staycation, so I like being at home and just not having to work. Anyway, on topic. But part of why I will never put automation into my feeding of both fish and plants is because I use that time to observe behavior and health in my aquariums. That is my built-in check to myself to make sure that I am paying attention to things that are going on in my fish tanks. That way, if something seems a little off, I can focus in on it and decide whether or not it's like, do I need to add more fertilizer? Do I need to deal with some medication? Is X, Y just seem off? Is that one fish being too much of a bully? Whatever the heck it may be. Alec Kumanoff, English and German aquarists are more serious the hobby than us. Freshwater equals multiple tank syndromes. Reefers only 1 to 2 tanks. I wouldn't say that that's perfectly accurate. I think it's just that there is a common sentiment in the European side of the hobby to focus, kind of as Greg had said earlier, on quality over quantity. You especially see it in the prevalence of how much you have aquascaping services and people like George Farmer or Yuri's Green Aqua as a whole, where you have a significantly higher rate of these high-end aquascapes tanks being the norm as opposed to kind of a more unique thing as they seem to be in the North Americas, right? And I think when that becomes the commonality or more like the accepted norm, it changes the mentality up here for the hobbyist. And there's some great examples, right? You've got people that aren't aquascapers, but the way that they treat things like the puffer breeder that some of the aquarium co-op folks visited out in, I think it was Germany, but a few other people where it's just like the way that they approach the hobby, and in his case was like the rate of live foods he created and all these crazy things he was doing that are just meticulous and perfected because it is the norm. And there's kind of this thing in the German hobby where, like, if you were losing fish at the rate that often a lot of aquarists lose fish in the United States, you would be frowned upon, right? It's a cultural difference, and it's a mentality difference. And I think that's part of why you see innovation, at least as it is marketed to the American side of the hobby, significantly weaker. Where if we look at Europe and Asia, there's actually a reasonable amount of newer companies that show up, or companies that expand into things they previously didn't do. I'm thinking like kind of how Awaze went from doing a lot of pond stuff to building filters designed for like your aquascaping tanks and your smaller tanks with like the Biomasker series, right? Eheim, the prevalence of some of the Eheim stuff that's in Europe that just doesn't exist in the Americas, that is significantly higher quality. You know, there's also the last part that I want to talk about, and then we'll go back into like really actively interacting with you, chat. You've been wonderful. Thank you. Is there is a mindset in the corporate side of the Americas, especially, of continuous revenue growth. And what that often leads to, especially things like the prevalence of changes in the 90s, is designed obsolescence. equipment that is designed to only last you so long, or to have something you have to continuously replace, because that creates a continuous stream of revenue for that company. And that's what they want to capture. They don't necessarily care about that first purchase leading to a customer going, I like this company and the product they provide so much that anytime I build anything else in the future, they're my first choice. They care more about, like, that one time you do purchase, I want to do everything I can to make you have to continuously spend money at some rate, whatever interval they decide, that helps continuously give us more money than just buying an item once that you expect to last 15, 20 years. Adam's Electric Universe. Huge mentality difference in Asia as well. They often see tropical fish as having to do with luck, wealth, and spirituality, and other things. Yeah, and I think that's part of, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about in Germany. There are cultural differences that are not as prevalent in the American side of the hobby that change the mentality of how certain things are done. So things like the Asian arowana are very coveted in many of the Asian cultures because they represent a number of things. And often many of you have probably heard this, there's a superstition that when Asian arowana die or jump and end up passing, it is because they have basically taken on some horrific luck that would actually have happened to their owner instead. They're protecting their owner from some horrible fate. It's kind of a cool, like, spiritual, depending on, how you look at things, right? Mentality, but it's very different than, like, our standard culture, where often we will look at fish as just another pet, right? It's not necessarily the way, and the only way I can think of it is, I don't know that everyone in the hobby, I think there are plenty of us who look at our fish with as much love and care as we would our dogs. I mean, I've got Shantoto right over here, right? And when she hurt herself, I didn't even think twice about just going, get the surgery done. I don't care what it costs. Where might not happen so much with fish for a majority of hobbyists. So I think that's one of the things that we can kind of look at is that portions of the cultural and mentality difference inherently drive the companies designing these things to change less. Didn't King of DIY's arowana save his marriage when it died? Johnny, why are you trying to get me in trouble, man? Why are you trying to do this? Why are you trying to do this? Oh, we can't talk about that topic. I will rage something fierce. Anyway. Frank Schilling. All I know is that we receive great information from good folks like Bentley. Oh, it's definitely not just me. There's lots of fantastic creators that give lots of great information out there. But I appreciate it. To have so many options for our aquariums and fish keeping. Yeah. Lumpy dog. I value my pets over most humans. Just kidding. No, not really. Nabaka fan. Let's just say you're paying a whole lot to cycle test and stress fatigue test a $5 filter over even a $30 filter. Design is driven by marketing, not engineering. Such an issue. Yeah, and I think that's actually a relevant point, is that a lot of, and then this goes back to kind of American business practice, is that rather than letting the quality of product speak for itself like it used to be, it is more about how can we get the most cost-effective, highest profit margin, and then advertise the hell out of it so that more and more people buy it, and thus we become very successful by selling lots and lots of this cheaper thing that we make significantly higher profit on. But I think there are companies that definitely go against that. Unfortunately, I think many of them are unique or few and far between. I think Eheim is an example, right? Eheim has traditionally made products that you could just say, Eheim's work for frickin' ever, right? Their filters, especially, like the classic Eheim canister filter, those things are dang near bulletproof. You can abuse the heck out of them and they just keep running on you. There are a number of great aquarium lights out there if you account for the fact that LEDs can only last so much long. right? They aren't invincible and last forever, but you can see the difference between, say, like a Chihiro's light or a UNS's light than you would with like the random knockoff, you know, Chinese company stuff that you see on Amazon. And whether you like Haiger, I actually saw a great rant video from Michael's Fish Room about Haiger recently, uh, or whatever, you know. Didn't Eheim leave the U.S. market for a year or two? I believe so. And part of it was just, I think, a cultural difference. Eheims were deemed expensive and they weren't selling as well. And a lot of the people keeping them were tired of having to keep like this massive catalog of replacement parts, even though that's extremely helpful to the hobbyist because you just need to keep a small amount of them at all times. And then if something ever went wrong, you would go to your local pet store or fish store, whatever kept your Eheim products, get your replacement part, and fix your problem, right? But yeah. All right. So we'll go into like regular chat, but feel free to keep it on topic or go completely off topic. I don't care. You guys know how this works. But at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see stuff. And if for some reason you have a super complicated question, you can always email me at bentley.pasco. I'll put it in chat. gmail.com. That's my email. I will admit I've been super busy with work. I actually barely got to live stream today. So sometimes I'm a little delayed in my responses, but I do try to respond to every email. And if for some reason it falls in the cracks, just email me again. Because it might have got filtered out by a bunch of other BS small Chinese Amazon companies all trying to get me to test their products and give them videos praising everything they create. And I refuse to do any of it because it's all garbage. Aquarium background time. Get your new outs yet? No, that's not in the budget right now. Just being honest. Had some things happen between losing old job, getting new job, and frankly some repairs around my house that just ate up all my fun money. Soon though, I have I can get some reimbursement for a new desk through my job. I think, which is I have to go ask them and find out exactly what process they need me to walk through. But they're willing to pay for some dollar value worth of new desk. It just hasn't been the highest priority. I've been working on a bunch of other things, honestly, around my house, mostly surrounding my wife and my dogs and my fish, because they get priority over my stuff. Turns out. Nabokov fan, Marina Aqua Clear design is how old? Yeah, I mean, a lot of those designs are ancient because they function well, but they also there isn't a demand to have something so significantly better that they have to work on something different. Only a way. My mother-in-law visited me, then went back to China and purchased 100 goldfish without consulting me. Then the goldfish all died. Well, ouch. Mike, Hygrophila chai. Have you kept it? Any advice? Have I kept it? Yes. Any advice? In general, likes higher light, high levels of CO2, is like a lot of Hygrophilas, a bit of a nitrogen hog. It really likes higher levels of nitrogen. So I wouldn't try to do the lean method of dosing in an aquarium with Hygrophila chai. You're going to want strong light. You're going to want good levels of CO2. It can be a bit of a bear. Scott Kahala. Oh, you got your pin. Fantastic. Yeah, I'm happy to do those things. Like when I can, I love doing little giveaways and stuff like that because it's just fun for me. Like I like fish related nonsense. During the holidays, of course, every year I usually give out a bunch of gift cards, almost always to Dan's Fish because I love Dan's Fish. But usually I give folks an option if they're in the States between like Dan's Fish or Co-op. Maybe you want plants and not fish, so it gives you two options. And frankly, if somebody was like, I would really like it to this company, I would probably just get one to that company if they really push me on it. I don't care. I like supporting companies. It's great. Stephen P. 2003 Aquardix. Buddy, how you doing? I had a sprig of Hygrophila chai once for like 2 whole weeks. I had Hygrophila chai for, I think it was like 2.5 months. And I never got it super happy. I could get it to grow and I could propagate it, but I never got it to like optimal color. And it really what it came down to is I wasn't pushing high enough CO2, and even with like a Fluval 3.0 on pretty much full blast, it's kind of not enough light to make that plant hit its absolute maximum. And it does love to die. It's a bear, and it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, there's another thing. Don't bother trying with super low KH water. Well, I didn't know it needed high KH. That's interesting. Higher carbon hardness for the chai. I'm trying to think, because the tank I had it in was lower KH, so that maybe that's why it never got to like full happy. But eventually, I had a friend who really, really wanted it, so I just sold it to him for not very much money in the grand scheme of things. So I'd got my points through my horticulture awards program, and I didn't like the plant enough to want to keep fighting with it. It's really what it comes down to. Johnny Dancefish, Bentley, did you get a Melis pin? I did have a Melis pin that I gave away. Yes. I gave away the Sudie McGill Melis pin. I had the Sudie McGill Melis, the no, it needs low KH. Well, then maybe that's why it just didn't die on me. I don't know. Boop, 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 boop. Kalitawa. There was an Arowana pin. I had a Cyanodorsalis pin. I'm trying to remember what the fifth pin I had was. I had one more. I'd have to go look it up. But easy way. I'll go to Lily Ichthyology. Oop. Ichthyology. Every time I try to spell it, I always think I'm doing it wrong, even though it's right. Let's see here. I had the Calito. Oh, then the Melanitania Melanda was the other one that I had. Oh, man. So they added two new ones. One is the one that I care about of the new ones that they added in pins is the Sailfin Molly. That looks good. That looks good. Adam's Electric Universe, are there any other specific areas of innovation you see as seriously lacking in the entire industry? Honestly, I think heaters are the biggest problem. I think heaters are the things that we're trying too hard to make more compact and cheaper instead of making something that is significantly more accurate with automatic shutoff based on temperature issues. So being automatically wired to a temperature probe that has a built-in shutoff, and whether you would need that as two separate parts and you sell them as a kit, whatever that may be. And this is just something that, because a lot of people do it in the hobby, why hasn't someone designed a heater with this in mind? Right? It doesn't make any sense why you haven't designed a heater with this in mind. Designing heaters for low flow aquariums versus high flow aquariums. A lot of the best, quotation marks, the best heaters out there are, if they don't have enough flow, they basically just like fry, right? And that's part of why I think heaters are probably the thing that need the most innovation. I think the thing that gets the most innovation, at least that comes to the United States market, is lighting, because that's the most obvious thing that you can do things to. But there's a lot of need to kind of up the game both in heaters and filtration. I really think we could do a significantly better job with filtration, in whether it's canister filters or hang on the back filters, as far as powered filtration is concerned. That is just not being done. We could also do things with like types of, and really it's not necessarily innovation. It's just adjusting the mentality of how we put a sponge filter together. Because one of the best filtration methods, we haven't got to it yet, but we're going to, as far as a air-powered filtration, is honestly the Matten filter. It's really, really good. But the problem is you have to do all this work. You either have to wedge this dumb thing in there, or you have to put baffles in to hold it in place. Right? So why aren't we building something that clips onto the edge of your tank? to make an automatic baffle that holds it in place. That's such a simple thing. It's so tiny and simple. But then you don't need glass baffles. Or why aren't we building something that is kind of like almost like a cartridge system, except that it's completely reusable. It's just a method of holding the media that prevents that issue where when you do need to clean those filters, and you're going to see this in a video relatively soon, but when I complain about it, that you don't have to worry about your substrate flowing into the area where your matte filter is supposed to sit. You actually have a built-in barrier without having to go through all the trouble of siliconing in glass baffles. Like, why does this not exist? It's not that hard to design. You could do it out of simple plastic. You could have it literally clip in place, and it just has basically a tray system where you've got the built-in barrier, and then you just pull the whole matte filter out, go service it, plug it back in. Easy. The engineering for this is not hard at all. Jeff Kane, I build my own matte filter holders. Yeah, I mean, like, there are plenty of people that can 3D print this. Why is there no one in the freaking industry building them at scale? Because then you'd see a lot of people who otherwise might look at a matte filter and go like, I don't want to deal with the baffles and stuff. All of a sudden go, why am I doing this tiny sponge filter when I could just put a whole corner matte filter in? And it's just literally a plunk, clip, clip, done. Why aren't we doing it? Bentley, do you consider Aquarium Co-op's nets innovation and worth it? So I like their nets for larger fish where you don't have to be careful with finer netting. And what I mean is, like, certain fish, to have like more coarse netting can damage them and actually be very hurtful to them, where you need significantly finer network in order to basically protect them. That's not what's going on. Theirs is designed kind of with their store in mind, and it's fine. I use a bunch of their nets. I like their nets. The box style netting as opposed to the regular kind of just dip bag bit is great for trying to catch rainbow fish. It's great for dealing with rainbows. It's a freaking nightmare to navigate around in a planet tank. I catch so much random stuff. And part of it is the netting, because that fine netting won't catch on things, but that coarser netting will. Is it perfect? No. Is it good for its price? I like it. I use them. Do I think there's some better stuff out there? Absolutely. There's a fantastic video from Chris Biggs, the Mad Aquarist, about fish nets. And he talked about some of the things that are out there that are done basically by breeding houses that special order these types of nets that we don't see in the industry. But they're incredible. There's innovation missing all over the place. There's all sorts of things we could do to be better. The question is whether or not people would actually purchase those things, or whether there's enough money to fund getting those things out there. Oinky, what's up? Besides duckweed, any plant you consider a nemesis? Most of them are floating plants, but really the one that I hate even more than duckweed is Riccia. Riccia, like, once you have it in a tank, I swear it's impossible to get rid of, much like duckweed. The only difference is it grows so significantly denser because of the natural structure of Riccia that it's just a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. It can look amazing in aquascapes, right? Because you're like gluing it on rocks and it creates this little bushy type thing, but otherwise, that stuff is the devil. And once it's floating, it's happy as can be. It'll just completely coat the top of your tank and basically make an impermeable layer of junk that you have to deal with. Only way. Thanks for doing the wet dry filter video. Now I finally know why they exist. At least that's my opinion on why they exist. Realistically, like, what it comes down to wet dries, and I didn't cover this because comments had it pretty good, and I kind of like making people do things in the comments because they think I'm wrong, which I love. It's fun. That's how I start problems. It's a kind of outdated mentality on how to do filtration.
There are just better ways to do it. A great example is going to be like the moving bed filter. Similar mentality of high oxygenation, very healthy bacterial colony, very high bioload capacity in the like full on sump size moving bed filter. Then in a wet dry, it does basically all the same things, but just better is really what it comes down to. But I don't know that I'm going to do a video on the moving bed unless I'll put up a poll to see if people really want it. But we're getting pretty close to the end of that series, so I can go back to like, normal stuff. Let's see here. I know I missed one before. Omar, I have several ideas with zero time to even attempt R&D or produce. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough, right? You've got a business to run. You've got things you have to do. It's hard to then add an extra thing. Mitch McClintock, the industry responds to demand. Freshwater has a tendency to shun new things. Yeah, and I think we've covered that relatively well. But I wish there was a way to change that mentality, I guess is what I'm getting to where it was more common to say the mentality of the European market or the Asian market where innovation is welcomed and people want to see new things that add extra layers of whether it's information, ability, capability, what have you. Cora Works, what about Swiss Tropicals? What about Swiss Tropicals? So if you want my honest opinion, I think that they sell a number of good products for way too much money. I think the amount they charge for the things they offer is so ludicrously high compared to what it should be that it is almost damaging to the aquarium hobby. Because even if you like the Poré sponge filter, as an example, how many people are going to invest $30 and $40 on a sponge filter when they can buy one for $16? You know what I'm saying? Like, why would I buy a filter that is 3 times more expensive just because it's a slightly finer one? And in the end, when you have to go clean those things, you ever clean those things? They take forever. I have a couple of them. I avoid cleaning them. They're just basically like extra just in case to move oxygen around in case of a power outage or something in one of my tanks, but I just like don't clean them because I have other powered filters that take me 10 minutes to clean in comparison. And those things, I swear, to get them properly cleaned out will take me 45 minutes to squeeze all the junk out of them. And that's if I was doing it regularly. At this point, I've neglected one for so long that I'm like, I don't know that I'm ever going to clean it unless I take it out of the tank entirely. It's just like, okay, I'll go look for as an example. Like one of the things that Swiss Tropicals makes that I like the most is those German breeding rings. I think they're really great, except for if you're trying to do rainbow fish. And the only reason why I say that is if you don't have something that is going to try and feed off of the mesh below, the mesh is so fine that none of the food can get through, and it can eventually cause fungus. That's great for like Corydoras and similar like fish that will eat off the bottom, but baby rainbow fish don't do that at all. So you run into all sorts of potential issues. And then they have like their quote better box filter that is kind of sort of kind of. But like they're cube filters, right? Trying to remember the like cube filter that has the really good Poré mesh is just they always felt really expensive, and sometimes a little too fine. I don't know. It's a personal thing. Also, they're not the prettiest. They're white PVC, which stands out like a sore thumb. So for those who want to try and hide stuff, it kind of sucks. Like if you had more options, maybe I'd care more. I don't know. I'm sure they have. I know they have cheaper versions of their sponge filters too. Like I know they have little box filters that are different foam that are only like $8 or $9 or $10 or whatever. But just you go there because you want the really nice ones, right? And then they cost a ton. Yeah, not my jam. Not my jam. It's a personal thing. I would rather have a matin filter over their sponge filters or even their box filter. But there's so much things that we could do better. Passing on, have you seen the very large fancy koi nets? The end of them isn't even sewn up. Yeah, yeah. But you're also, that doesn't work for small fish, right? But it works for when you're dealing with those massive koi, because you've got kind of like just Herkin fish that you're picking up with those carp. Only way, there was some other plant that got mentioned. Hold on. I guess it was another plant that was like the devil. Oh, like Sawasser tang? Yeah, I like Sawasser tang, but that's because it's really easy to grow. Aquarium background tape. I looked at new things the hobby needed and came up with a way to attach backgrounds. Yeah, like, little innovations like that are fantastic. And I'm not trying to belittle that. I mean, like, finding a niche where there's an opportunity to do something different and more user-friendly is always good. But, sometimes the biggest frustrations are when the really big expensive pieces of hardware, and expensive in quotation marks, expensive in the sense of what it takes to re-engineer and rethink the whole thing, right, from the ground up. It's an expensive process, especially going through quality controls and all those kind of things. It's not easy. That's where it's very, very expensive to do. And it's so hard to see, to get a small company to even think about doing that, right? Johnny, what about innovation at the hobbyist level? There are some neat 3D printed stuff on Etsy. Yeah, so, I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I think is a little outside the box. You get lots of cool 3D printing jobs that can do all sorts of things, like replacement filter trays that allow you to do more dynamic things inside of like your AquaClear filter, or things that like modify the Fluval Flex and a lot of the Fluval pre-built tanks and things like that, right? There's some really cool stuff out there. But if there's an obvious market for those things, why aren't we seeing the significantly better build level that would come at proper scale from a manufacturer? Like 3D printed outflow baffles for hob filters. Yeah, that's an example. I've seen these really cool. I actually have some on a tank downstairs that's not full. These 3D printed outlet spouts. So that instead of just spraying in one direction, they spray in like 4 directions to help equalize the flow around the tank better in a fairly large acrylic tank that's downstairs. And I've seen them in action. They're fantastic. And they happen to come with the tank, but it's like things like that are not designed by their manufacturers at all. Why aren't some of the people that do a lot of the aquarium plumbing type stuff that is on that side of that even that niche part of the hobby, right? Why aren't they designing similar things? You can find all sorts of crazy things on Etsy because people are just thinking. So why isn't a company going to them and licensing that design, right? License the design and just make the better version of it, or just, rip it off entirely, because big corporations do that all the time. And often the little guy can't possibly fight you. But yeah, there's all sorts of things that like the injection level molding could just produce at a significantly higher rate that, a mom and pop person with a 3D printer can't replicate when it comes to cost, efficacy, etc. Mellow because corporations suck. Well, I mean, yes. And it's all about bottom line, not educating or selling products they ate already. I can generally agree with that, but I think that's a bigger sentiment in the Americas than it is in other parts of the world. There are companies that do things. Europe is more common than anything else, where companies actually have some level of ethics to them that isn't purely profit driven. But even some of the biggest profit driven companies out there at one point did things in a more ethical manner. Like, I think you could get some of the other companies out there to do some really cool stuff for the hobby. It's just there has to be that demand that drives the innovation, right? And that's part of I think that one of the biggest problems we have is that in the Americas especially, I know, Canadians, United States folks like myself, we're the fault. We're at fault. We have to take some fault, at least. There's not enough demand to actually like drive those companies to do that kind of work yet. Can it change? I would hope so. I would like to see it. Hector, it is really expensive at first to make great products. It gets better over time, but then you need to make sure quality does not drop. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and like even simple things, like we can look at an example, right? Like finding the right, in the case of Hector, Hector's everything is a blended mishmash of voodoo witchcraft in a powdered all-in-one fertilizer that includes a few other things, like GH and KH buffering, dechlorinator. It's all built in there. It's literally everything, right? That's hence the name. But like figuring out what the right mixture and relevancy is in that thing, figuring out the right dosage and dosage mechanism that is easy for the user, easy to package, right? There's all these little things you can come down to it. And let me give you an example. And this is non-fish related, but I think it's relevant to the conversation. Right, I work as a quality assurance tester. I basically break things for a living. I've been doing a lot of work lately because my company's been pushing out a lot of changes, trying to prep for this really big release that we have in basically a week. And in doing all of that work, because there was so much test work on me, I missed a scenario. And it's super simple. It seems super simple. But basically, what if a completely new user comes to our product and tries to sign in, because we use this like third-party authorization? Think of it like how you're allowed to sign in with Google or Facebook in a lot of different places, right? But in our space, you're using this third-party wallet called MetaMask because we have to do with some level of blockchain stuff, right? A completely new user, if they're on our basic website, not the product that we're developing that I have to talk about very vaguely. If they're on our basic website, if they're a completely new user and they tried to hit the sign-in button, we have a background service that will recognize they don't have an account with our website. So while we're trying to give them authorization, we also need to tie them to a user account. So we're going to walk them through the build an account. It's really simple. It's just, here's your nickname and your email, and we tie that to your wallet, right? There's a service that controls that in our system. But the regular sign-in is controlled by a different service. They're two different services. So when we go to the new product that we're working on, this really cool thing that I think is really awesome, it's only hooked up to one of the two services. You can't create a new account for us, but you can do all the sign-in stuff with your wallet. So when you try to sign in, you can never get anywhere because you need an account, but you're never hitting the thing that triggers build an account. We just need the nickname you want and your email. Right? Simplest, earliest thing. But we were digging so deep and we had to shift over in how some of these services function to get rid of some problems on the back end from an old service with a refactor in our code that we just completely skipped that dang thing. So it wasn't until earlier this week, basically, when I was walking through and doing some testing, I was like, why isn't this working? Had to look at all these different logs and error things to figure out what was going wrong. And I felt like I just had rammed my head into the wall for a minute because it's like, how could I be so dumb and forget that thing? Right? Sometimes we forget about the easiest portions of design, the most simple, user-friendly portions. And we think about the end goal, and whether that end goal is make a cheaper product that has higher profit margin, or make this really cool thing that lets you do X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be. Unfortunately, parts of engineering and innovation can take you down a path where you forget to do the little things. And those little things are what can make something the difference between being an okay change to a really good change. UX is an art. UX is absolutely an art. Dude, user experience. Oh man, user experience is absolutely an art form. Okay, so fun stuff. Let me see here. I've probably missed a semblance of question in my babble about my work. Mel, not in love with the USA, and I'm born and raised. I mean, I think it's really easy to get political on that. I think the simplest thing that I can say is the grass always seems greener elsewhere. And you can have tons of examples like that, right? You could have like, oh, well, this person always does well with this thing and I always struggle with it. The grass is greener. Or my neighbor's lawn literally is always better maintained than mine. The grass is greener. Why am I not doing the things? Or what special voodoo witchcraft is my neighbor doing that makes their lawn look so good? That one car functions better than this car, whatever the heck it may be. It's so easy to look at only the positives of something else you don't have and say that the grass is greener. But often each of these scenarios, whether you want to get on the political side of it or not, I choose not to right now, thank you. It's too much of a headache. But all of these things are very complex because there's always a significant laundry list of positives and negatives and kind of neutrals, right? And we focus, it's human intuition. We focus on only the good things of that thing we perceive that we want and only the negatives of the thing that we have. And we often don't go and look at like, yeah, that guy who's got that fancy BMW that looks really nice, but have you seen the cost of the payments and how much it costs to maintain the dang thing? And, oh yeah, it looks really sweet and amazing and it's super comfortable on the inside, but have you seen how expensive an oil change is? And what's the gas mileage like compared to your Honda that gets amazing gas mileage and you barely have to maintain the thing? Yeah, it might not be as fancy. It might not be as quiet on the inside, but it does what it needs to do. And a lot of the positives are easy to overlook because you're focused on that grass is greener, right? And I think it's so easy in a lot of things, not just like where you live, where someone else lives, someone else's success in a given hobby compared to your own, the neighbor who has the very attractive spouse, whatever the heck that may be, right? It's so easy to focus on the grass is greener, but rarely do we have the full picture to really assess that, like, well, the reason why that guy's grass is greener is because he puts in 10 hours of work more every couple of weeks than I ever do. And it turns out I don't want to put that much work in to make my lawn look that little bit better. Or maybe, I don't want to spend the triple my car payment to afford that fancy BMW when it turns out my Honda hasn't needed maintenance more than maybe once a year and a couple of oil changes. And other than that, it gets just as good a gas mileage, does everything I need, and costs me way less money. So I can put that money toward other things like buying fish or buying plants, right? Whatever those things may be. It's so difficult for us. And it's part of human psychology, right? It's so difficult for us to look at the entirety of that comparison and truly understand what is going on as opposed to that easy grass is greener. Papelin, good to see you, buddy. Welcome, welcome, welcome. There was a hello from you sent last week. I know I'm kind of diving into the deep philosophically, right? But I hope you can understand why I say those things. Kelly Foreman, Jake also has a super hot girlfriend. Kelly, I mean this in the most polite and loving way possible. I love my wife. And no matter how hot Jake's girlfriend is, she cannot compare to my wife. That's right. But I do love you, Kelly, because you're wonderful. But you know what I'm saying, right? Bob Purcell, who is your pick for the Super Bowl? Which fish would you pick to represent each team and which fish for their head coach? I feel like the only easy one out of that is Andy Reid as a bristlenose pleco because of his big old mustache, right? And he's kind of a chunky lad like me. Plecos get kind of chunky, right? So those things. I think that's the only one I could easily do. But I don't know. I think we're getting the Super Bowl that very few people want. I think a lot of us wanted a different matchup because it would have been more entertaining. I would have loved to have seen the Detroit Lions in the Super Bowl. As a Seahawks fan, inherently I can't stand the 49ers because, their fans are insufferable, and I know that our fans are insufferable to the 49er fans. Whatever. Don't care. They're insufferable to me, and that's how I look at life. And just there are plenty of people who are probably sick of the Chiefs, other than people like Chattanooga Ed, who are Chiefs fans. Those kind of things, right? I don't care. I just hope the game's good. I don't want it to be a blowout. I don't want to have some like ridiculous nonsense. Bob Meadow, I had Andy as a walrus. He is kind of a walrus too. But if we were picking specifically a fish, I go bristlenose pleco. Patrick Mahomes is probably like some kind of a pistogramma, right? He's kind of got that fanciful haircut going on. It's kind of like the big Finage and Europistos, stuff like that. The 49ers are some kind of despicable, I can't stand them fish, even though they've got all sorts of crazy nonsense going on. So maybe they're like really, really good, like high quality betas. I don't know. They got some fight in them. I just want Taylor Swift to the Super Bowl. Who cares about sports ball? I could do without Taylor Swift. Not because some other people freak out about it. More just like I personally don't understand the massive focus on her in a football game. It's like, yeah, she's dating Kelsey. Cool. Plenty of other celebrities have dated football players. Who cares? Who cares? Let them have their relationship. Are the two of them happy together? That's all that matters. It's really all that matters. Otherwise, I don't care. Just don't. I've seen some interesting takes on Facebook over it, and to me, I'm just like, this isn't that important, guys. Celebrities aren't that important. Football to most people is not that important. It might be kind of like a religion to me because I'm a psycho, and it's one of those things that we Seattleites grip onto as sports because we're in this area that 9 months of the year is like overcast and raining, so it depresses people. So you need something to get all that frustration and energy out on. Sports is perfect, and most of our teams relentlessly suck. So when we get one that's actually kind of good, it's even crazier around here. People are just excited for the breakup song. Oh God, I'm not a fan of Taylor Swift's music. I just don't like it. She's never entertained me. She's never been someone that I've gravitated toward when she was a country singer versus a pop singer. Her music's just not my jam. I don't care. But you know what? I'm not going to be like, I can't stand that Taylor Swift on the TV. I just don't understand why there's such a focus on it. Maybe that's the old man yells at cloud side of me. It's like, I just don't get it, right? I'm just getting old. I can't understand those things, you young people. Even though the fish hobby's a lot of old farts like me, right? You're failing to see that she's the younger generation's current version of, say, the Beatles or Aerosmith. She will not be as inspirational as the Beatles, maybe Aerosmith. But I don't fail to see that. I understand that she's got a wide mass populace appeal, but I just don't care. I don't care. Whatever. Get off my lawn. Henry Rothschild with this real fast as the last. Do you use autofish feeders? Absolutely not, Henry. I said this earlier, but maybe you hadn't joined in yet. I purposely don't use automatic fish feeders for a reason. I use the time when I'm feeding my fish and feeding my plants. I don't use automatic dosers either. To observe my tank, observe the health and behavior of my fish and plants. Because that's the time when I can pay attention to things the most. And it forces me to go to every tank and look at them, at least for a little while. Watch how they're eating, watch how they're handling things, look at how the plants are doing, all that kind of stuff. Because then I can catch when things don't seem right. And I can start focusing in on them more and paying attention more. Maybe I'm having a calcium deficiency and I'm seeing leaves curling. I'm seeing pinholes in leaves. I need to do that. Or maybe I've got that one fish that's not really eating. They look like they eat food, but then they spit it out immediately and something's going on. Maybe I need to isolate that fish and medicate them. Or medicate the whole tank and be paranoid, which is more common for me. Or maybe it's just like, maybe I just need a little salt. Maybe they're not feeling all that great. Maybe I just need to test my water and make sure something's not wrong with my water. Probably need to test my water. I should test my water. Test your damn water. Those things, right? I use that time to assess. And it's not every day. I don't feed every day. I take breaks in my feeding on my fish because I have found it to be healthy for them. I do those things to make sure that I'm not slacking on the most important part of my fish keeping, which is paying attention to the health and general coloration of my fish and plants. So no, I'll probably never use an automatic feeder, ever. Unless I'm testing it for something dumb. But then I'll be standing there going, work, work, observe, work, as opposed to like using it as something to forget about doing it for a certain number of days. Rant over. All right, gang. It is that time where we run away. Can I show you this like ridiculously large water bottle that brother-in-law James bought and then gave to me to use today? This thing's enormous. We went to a small local convention last weekend, and we brought this along so that we would have water to drink. It was just this almost enormous thing you're trying to drink out of. It's like you might as well have a jug. Anyway, gang, I want to thank you all for being here. We'll be getting into the kind of the tail end of the filtration series starting this week. I'll put up a poll to see if people want to see certain things. Is it Stanley? No, it's not a Stanley. It's a generic company. I don't know what. But that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and as always, stay awesome. See you guys next week. That Taylor Swift told her to get off my lawn.